This series is made possible by the generous donation of Stifel Financial and viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Where Do We Go From Here? This is a series on the issue of climate change. This is the first episode. In the past, we have had episodes on homelessness and gun violence. So you will be able to watch these programs as they are posted on our website. If you go to YouTube, Where Do We Go From Here? NCTV, you'll be able to see quite a few episodes on the various issues that we tackle here locally in Nevada County. The idea being that our county and community has a number of issues that need to be looked at, solved if possible, and shared with other communities who are facing similar problems. Climate is something, of course, that is facing not only our community in the Sierras, but the state of California and globally, we're experiencing tremendous changes in our climate. So with us today, we have Trina Kleist, who is a reporter, journalist, was past editor, city editor of the Union, I believe.
City editor.
Right. And so welcome.
Thank you.
And it's a pleasure to have you here. I followed you when you were city editor of the Union. I really liked the job you did then, which is part of the reason that I asked you to come and be interviewed. I'd like you to let the folks know a little bit about you, your journalistic past and experience.
Okay. So I've been a journalist for more than 30 years now. I started out with an interest in covering science, and so that was my initial training. I had gone to college. I had worked in the computer industry for a few years. I decided I wanted to go into journalism. And I went to a program to train especially to write about science. And I worked in that for a short time, and then I got a job in daily journalism in West Virginia. And I loved daily journalism. I loved learning about all kinds of things. And I did that for a few years, and then I decided to go to Mexico. I wanted an adventure. And I ended up living in Mexico for 8 years and covering just all kinds of fun and exciting things, basically having way too much fun.
I'm not sure as journalists what that transfers into.
Well, it's journalism is a weird kind of business. It's about being a generalist and adapting to all kinds of situations and learning all kinds of things, and I found that I just love learning about all these things that, if I were working a real job, I would have no reason to learn any of this stuff. So I covered the presidential elections, I covered natural disasters, I covered state and local elections.
This is in Mexico?
All in Mexico, yeah. And then there was this indigenous uprising in the far south. So I went down there, because that's where the news was, and I ended up living in Chiapas for 5 years, covering the Zapatista rebellion for the Associated Press. So I did that, had a great time, and...
that was a difficult time.
Chiapas was not as difficult as the conflict in El Salvador or Nicaragua or Colombia. It was really kindergarten in terms of the violence and the danger. But it was very, very interesting, and being in Mexico made me really appreciate that aspect of American history. It was something I really didn't know a lot about. So
we could probably go into a whole program just based on Chiapas.
Chiapas is really interesting. That whole thing was interesting.
Let's not do that, at least this time.
So I came back to the United States, and ended up here in Nevada County because my parents were living here. So I've been here for almost 13 years in Nevada County.
And how recent was your stint with the city editor at the Union? When was that?
I worked at the Union from 2005 until 2012, and I was city editor for about 4.5 years of that time. And I covered all kinds of things while I was at the Union. I covered growth and development in the Western County when that was booming. I've covered business and all of the local government agencies. I wrote about, people and banks and crime, courts, just about everything.
So your specialty in science didn't come forward until recently with climate? When did this start?
Well, it's amazing how science can come into all kinds of things. So I would find different ways to bring that into a story. Mm-hmm. So it kind of depends on what the story is, but I've been kind of dabbling in that off and on for a long time.
And so when did your interest in climate begin? Well, that may go back a ways, but I guess I'm more interested in the recent, I actually started doing climate shows for NCTV in 2006. So the issue of climate has not always been recent. I mean, it's recent now because we're paying attention to it, but it's gone on for quite a while. Mm-hmm.
So I first became aware of the impacts of climate change before I even came to Nevada County. When I was I was in San Diego for a while and writing about coffee for a woman who imports coffee from basically the tropical latitudes into the United States. And I talked to farmers about what they were seeing there. And farmers in Central America and Southern Mexico were saying that they noticed that the insects that pollinate their coffee plants were not coming at the same time as when the coffee plants were flowering. Mm-hmm. And so they were noticing these changes as one of the things that was impacting the production of coffee, right, which is the number one cash crop for probably 25 million small producers around the world. So this was one of the first areas that I began to learn that climate change was affecting people's daily lives and their ability to sustain their families.
When did you start focusing on the Sierra Nevadas?
So in 2017, NID approached me asking me to write stories about climate change affecting the snowpack. And that's when I began to research the scientific material that was already out there about what was going on in the Sierra Nevada and in the West. Excuse me. So I had had some exposure to global climate change prior to that, just in kind of general news, but I hadn't researched that personally myself. And what I found was that this is an area that is really, really complex. The systems are huge. When we're talking about weather, we're talking about things that are going on like literally, in the atmosphere around the planet on a global scale, and there's a lot of chaos in the system, as well as...
Good term for it. Yeah.
So there's all this stuff going on, and there's all these things impacting it, and scientists are trying to figure out all this stuff, and they're using a lot of statistics and probability to understand that, and that's kind of a fancy way of saying math. And for most of us, math is very difficult, and in fact, the part of the brain that understands mathematics only developed very recently in human development. And mathematics has been a part of kind of human culture and economy for only a few thousand years. So for all of us, things that are explained with math take more work to understand. So as I started getting into this material, it really felt like this mud wrestling contest with me and the material, trying to understand it and understand these large systems that are not very well understood yet, even with all of our scientific knowledge. We're still just beginning to understand all this stuff. And at the same time, the science itself is developing. So what I learned is that, remember back when Al Gore came out with his books and all the stuff?
Inconvenient Truth.
Yeah, and that really put global climate change on, I think, the global stage and mainstream popular consciousness. And at that time, scientists were working with these really very, very crude models to explain what's going on at this global level. So since then, scientists in different areas are all trying to figure out, well, what's going on in my area? What's going on in North America? What's going on in the American West? What's going on in the Sierra Nevada? And this is going on also in Switzerland, in Japan, in a lot of places, and especially I became interested in, or I began to research in the areas where climate change is specifically affecting temperature and the ability for snowpack to form. Because what scientists have found is that there has been an overall temperature increase, and especially low temperatures during the winter. Okay, this is the really important number.
Not quite as low as they used to be.
Exactly,
Right.
exactly. So what they're finding is wintertime low temperatures are going up.
Right.
So in California, well, so first of all, let me back up a little bit. It turns out that California has the most varied climate in all of the United States. So within the natural variation that you see all across the United States, California's climate is much more extreme, okay? So if this is like average, okay, this is average, California doesn't have a whole lot of average years. We have some, but usually it's really hot, really cold, a little hot, a little cool. It goes up and down like this, okay? So we talk about an average year, but the fact is from year to year, not many of those years are really average, okay? So we have really warm years and cooler years. The same thing is true with precipitation. So precipitation goes up and down like that also. So you might have really wet years and drier years, wetter years. So you have these two highly variable systems that are overlapping to produce variations in both the amount of moisture that comes down and the temperature that is in the environment at that time. So if you have wintertime low temperatures that are below 32 degrees, which is the freezing point of water, 32 degrees Fahrenheit, then the precipitation comes down as snow. If it's above 32 degrees, it comes down as rain. So basically you have less than 1 degree up and down, and it changes from snow to rain, okay? So if the average temperature is here, and the average wintertime low temperatures historically in the Sierra Nevada have been around 26 or 27 degrees Fahrenheit, about 26 degrees Fahrenheit, okay? And these measurements go back to around 1895. I mean, that's kind of a base point when the measurements start getting to be better for temperature and precipitation, okay, in the Sierra Nevada. So if you have 26 degrees is your average wintertime low temperature, and that temperature rises, let's see, 26 to 32 is 6 degrees.
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
Right.
So we have projections of temperatures increasing anywhere from 3 to 10 degrees, depending on the time of year and which model you're looking at and how.
And they already have increased.
Yes, yes. So wintertime low temperatures in the Sierra Nevada have already increased a little over 2 degrees Fahrenheit in the last 123 years.
And has that been a gradual increase, or have you seen it accelerate at all?
It has accelerated since around 1975, so it's much faster. It's going up much faster since 1975. And what the weather data since 1895 shows us is that there was a period of some cool years in the first part of the 20th century, and a period of warmer years, and it kind of goes up and down like this. But the overall trend, okay, so it's going like this, okay, but the overall trend is up. Since 2000, there have been, I think, maybe only 1 or 2 years of below average temperatures during the winter. That most years since 2000, the average is higher than the historical average. So the average for that period, and there's a way, they have these statistical ways of kind of evening out the data so you can see trends.
Right.
So if your base average is this, and it's been going kind of up and down like this, now at 2000 it starts going up, up, up.
Right.
And that's the concern that leads to us talking about what does this do to snowpack, okay? So snowpack is the #1 source of water for western Nevada County. Okay?
It's also, I think, for California.
It's the #1 source for all of California.
Yeah.
It's a huge source for all of the West, okay? So even the water that's coming into Southern California, it comes through river systems that are fed by snowpack.
Right.
So snowpack has already been measured to be declining across the West, not just in the Sierra Nevada, but in the Colorado River system and in the Columbia River system. Snowpack has been measured to be 10% to 20% less than it was a few decades ago. And that's because of rising temperature. So here's the thing, so temperature is going up, but precipitation, which is moisture coming down to the surface of the planet, is about the same. Okay, so we're getting the same amount of precipitation, and remember there's that variation from year to year. So some years we get a lot, some years we don't get very much, some years are sort of in between. So now, with rising temperature, more of that precipitation is coming down as rain instead of snow, which is why we saw these big floods in early 2017. So if the temperature is just a little bit above 32 degrees, 10 years ago or 20 years ago, that might have been a little below 32 degrees. So that precipitation comes down, it stays, it forms as snow, it falls as snow, it stays as snowpack up in the mountains, and it sits there because the nighttime low temperatures keep it frozen, okay? But now all of a sudden, the nighttime low temperatures are maybe 33 degrees instead of 31 or 29 degrees. So it doesn't stay up there as snow, it melts and it comes down and it runs off faster. So all of a sudden you have all this runoff in January and February instead of later in the year.
I was going to say, not only is there a temperature rise, but it seems like it's getting warmer sooner.
Yes.
So that would tend to diminish the snowpack at an earlier time.
Yes, and so what people who manage water systems have observed is that in the last 4 or 5 years, the snow melt is coming as much as 2 months sooner than it did historically. So what's happening in the western county is the snow melt, historically, the snow melt starts coming down, okay, and it comes into reservoirs, and April 15th is when the irrigation season starts.
That's right.
In western Nevada County.
Counting on it.
Yeah.
My plants are waiting.
Yeah, and the agriculture in our county accounts on it. So here's the reservoir, and water starts being pulled out of the reservoir largely by agricultural users, okay? And so the water comes down, the water level comes down, 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 and then historically, about this same time, the snow melt is starting to trickle down and
Replacement.
backfilling. Yeah, so it's coming down like this, and the water's coming out like that. Okay,
Yeah.
so now what's happening is so if this is, let's say this is now December and January, okay, and that water is coming into the reservoirs in December, January, and February.
And they're already
And
filled.
the reservoirs are like this, and there's nobody pulling the water out yet, okay, because they don't need it until the middle of April.
So there's more pressure on reservoirs and dams.
So that water just is allowed to flow out
Okay.
of the system, all right?
Right.
And so now you're in July, okay, and it's hot. It's 98 degrees because, and by the way, temperatures are rising. Let's see, warm season temperatures are rising faster than cold season temperatures, okay? So,
Summers are getting hotter.
and summers are getting hotter at a pace that's faster than winters are getting hotter.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So the hotter seasons are getting hotter faster.
Right.
More hotter, more faster. Okay.
Okay.
So now it's July, okay, and the reservoirs are like this, and the customers are pulling it out of the reservoir, but there isn't the snow melt coming in to backfill.
Right.
Okay. And that's going on all up and down the state of California.
Right.
So 60% of all of California's water comes from this kind of a system, which has worked pretty well for 90 years, most of the time. Okay,
Right.
most years, except when there's several drought years in a row, and then things get dicey. But for most of 90 years, that's been the system. So that's what I found in all of this research. And I talked to scientists, golly, all over the place, in Arizona, at UCLA, at UC San Diego, Merced, Davis. I read research from Canada, from Switzerland, and this is going on all over the world. And I think about areas where
So the whole planet is getting warmer, basically, summer and winters, which is why we hear news of the ice melting in the Arctic
Right.
and the feedback loops that happen.
right, and glaciers melting. So all these countries whose river systems are based on glaciers melting, like China, okay, and those the big rivers, the Yellow and the Yangtze rivers, the India. Those big rivers are fed by
Ganges.
the glaciers
Yeah.
in the Himalayas slowly melting and feeding those systems. Well, if those glaciers are melting too fast, then
Floods.
A, floods, but B, where's the water going to come from
For future use.
when the glaciers are gone? So, I mean, that's pretty far forward, but it's something that is affecting people all over the world now. And this is happening regardless of whether people agree that climate is warming because of human impact. Okay, it's happening. Now, whether that system will, so historically, there are these warm periods. I mean, going back 1,000 years, okay?
Right.
There are these warm periods and then cool periods, maybe 300 years or 400 years of cool periods, the Little Ice Age that
Right.
occurred during the medieval period, okay? So, people who don't believe that humanity and human industry is causing the increase in temperatures will say, well, this is part of a natural change and it's going to come back this way. But there are these other projections that say that this is happening much, much faster
Right.
than can be explained by natural change.
Right, which is actually the reason that I started this series of programs. I mean, where do we go from here? to me, climate is very alarming, the kind of changes that are happening, and whether or not you want to believe what the causes are, we're dealing with the consequences. And the question is, what do we deal with the consequences? And if there's a way to address the causes, well, why not? So, it's kind of, in my mind, it's dual, do what we can to change whatever contributes to climate, and also adapt to where we can to look at the water scarcity that's going to happen in California, water scarcity that's going to happen in Nevada County as a result of the changes you've described. So we're looking at, sort of cause and effect, and what do we do with it in terms of our own lifestyle.
So something that I learned in my research that I think is really, really important is the impact of having high temperature years coincide with low precipitation years, which is what happened in the 2014, 2015 water years. So the research that I came across indicates that as these systems progress and as less precipitation comes down as snow more often as rain, there's going to be more of these kinds of droughts.
Right.
So again, to get back to this, like my imaginary graph and these these up and down years. Okay, so when the precipitation comes down as rain instead of snow, okay, that's going to happen more often. Okay, so when you get warmer summers on top of that, okay, then or even warmer winters. So first of all, you're going to get more years where you're going to have less water stored in the snowpack,
right.
Okay, and more years when the temperatures are going to be higher, okay. So there are going to be more years where instead of being around that average or over a period of 10 years, okay, you're going to have ups and downs, but it's going to kind of average out, okay. There are going to be more years where that average is tilting up,
right.
like this, okay.
Yeah.
So more years where if the temperature is just a little higher than average, maybe not at 2 degrees anymore, maybe it's 4 degrees or 5 degrees, okay. So a year that might be kind of average-ish, now all of a sudden is going to tilt into a drought year, okay, or a year like what you said before, where you have that higher evapotranspiration, higher evaporation of water, higher water needs, and there are going to be more years where instead of 1 or 2 or 3 clumps of dry, warm years, we'll have clumps of 4 or 5 or 6 dry, warm years,
right.
which is what we haven't. I mean, it happens a little bit, but now there are more of those big clumps of dry, warm years coming together, like what we had between 2012 and
right.
2015.
So, as a pragmatist, as someone who really likes to solve problems and to be prepared when at all possible, I immediately go to, well, what can we do? Where do we go from here now that we have observed, in my mind, enough science to establish the fact that this is going to be a trend, that we're going to have warmer summers, less water available for whatever reasons. And one of the things that became clear to me in interviewing Nick Wilcox from NID is that 90% of our water here locally is for farmers, and that the first cutbacks that are going to happen with the farmers, not the residents, not the home users. We can all try to conserve in the water that we use at home for whatever reasons, but the real cutbacks are going to happen with farmers and the kind of produce or lack of production that happens. So we're going to feel that rather acutely. And as a state, what do we do? How do we approach it?
Yeah. So here are a few more interesting things that people really need to know. NID's first order of providing for their customers is in, what do you call, I guess we can call them the rural areas, okay? Nevada City and Grass Valley,
Yes.
many years ago,
Yes.
so you already know about this.
I do, but the public doesn't.
Okay, so
Go ahead.
Nevada City
It's a big one.
and Grass Valley, many years ago, decided that they were not going to be a part of
Right.
the Nevada Irrigation District system. Instead, they were going to buy water from the system and process it and distribute it themselves. So if NID has to cut back on its water, it will
That's
cut
right.
back on the cities of Nevada City and Grass Valley first,
That's
because it's direct customers.
I know.
It owes. I mean,
Okay.
its responsibility
Right.
lies to its direct customers.
Okay, I want to say something here, though. Don't panic. I mean, Grass Valley, Nevada City, NID are fully aware of this. They are negotiating
Oh, that's
to
good to
do
hear.
something about
That's
it.
smart.
But it's not going to come without cost. And that's what the negotiations, because it's hard to imagine cutting off Nevada City and Grass Valley from water. You know,
Yeah.
that's a tough one. And, there are city people and county people who are working on it. That isn't to say it's being solved, but this is one of the issues, where do we go from here, that we have
Right.
to look at. And the public needs to become aware that this is a vital issue
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
being discussed.
Yeah, and here's something else that I don't think a lot of people know that's going on. So all of this stuff has to do with water rights, which is a hugely complicated issue. It's so arcane and obscure, and it's like, I don't know, looking in a crystal ball in a black room. So there's a movement in the state of California to declare water a basic human right. And the concern that water managers have is that if receiving water is a basic human right, that could cut through the water rights that all of these water supply companies all along the Sierra Nevada have to their water. So if they no longer can say we have senior water rights because water is a basic human right that all people deserve to get, so this creates a whole new possibility for regulation and appropriation of water, and nobody really knows what could happen with that. But there's a lot of concern, and especially since in California, the majority population is in the south, which is dry, but they have the population, and so the legislature has a preponderance of votes from the south. So this is a whole nother area of.
Well, it's great that we can inform people that this is going on. It's obviously going to be something that's going to take some time to wind out. I
Yeah.
can see court cases and people being sued and who knows what. But at least it's being brought to public attention.
Yes.
And,
because we have to know what's going on, and we have to have the information in order to make intelligent, rational decisions. That's my.
Great. Well, this is a
objective.
great place to stop. At least stop the first episode in a series of what will be many episodes on climate change, and how topics like water scarcity is going to impact our lives. So what I would encourage you to do is to continue to watch Where Do We Go From Here. Again, you can also find it on YouTube, Where Do We Go From Here, NCTV. And it's being broadcast on Monday nights, 7 p.m., Comcast Channel 17 locally. So, Trina, I want to thank you very much for
You're
this
very welcome.
introduction, Science 1A, and we'll continue to pursue climate and climate change as we experience it. So thanks for watching, and continue to tune in.